cosplaying Muichiro. Just enjoy these happy moments while they last, because as you know, this is not an infinite story. It's going to end pretty soon, and obviously battles are tragic, so keep that in mind if you're criticizing scenes like this. Why? Hello there, my fandom friends! As you can see, I'm cosplaying Muichiro. He's my favorite Hashira, and I thought it would be a fun idea to cosplay him while I go over episode 4 of the Hashira arc to put a smile on one's face. And so I'm making these video breakdowns not so much to talk about the episode itself and like my thoughts, but more so to compare the manga to the anime to see the similarities and differences. This may help the non-manga readers to understand that they're adding in a lot of content that isn't necessarily in the manga, but it's still really important. So we're going to talk about this in this video. We are mainly going to be covering this book, book 15, and everything that takes place in this episode comes from chapter 132, which we've been in for a little while now. And before I start talking about the similarities and differences, I just wanted to quickly tell you that I am doing a Hashira cosplay challenge where I am cosplaying all 9 Hashira, and it's up to you to decide who I cosplay next. And so I cosplay Muichiro, obviously. Round 1 of voting ended and Obanai won, so I will be cosplaying Obanai next. But if you want to learn more about what that challenge entails, I will direct you to a video up here that explains the whole process. Please vote and let me know what you think. So to start at the beginning of the episode, of course, we actually have about 9 panels of content from the manga that has been adapted to this anime episode, following Muichiro and Tanjiro and all of the trainees in this episode. And so the anime and the manga start off with Tanjiro arriving. However, the anime takes a slightly different direction, and it actually has Muichiro being kind of aggressive toward these trainees. He's telling them that they would have died multiple times if they hadn't tried to defend themselves, and so we get more of an aggression and a sassiness from Muichiro in the anime, but of course we know that from the Swordsmith Village arc. That's kind of how he is. In the manga, it only shows Muichiro training with Tanjiro, with the trainees kind of in the background, but the anime does a really good balance of showing both of these things. One of my absolute favorite parts of this episode was seeing how many times Muichiro smiled. We know that he has come to terms with Tanjiro. He has his memories back. Tanjiro is kind of that person who helped him to that point to have a more positive thinking mind and to recall his memories from back from the Swordsmith Village arc, and so we can see how much that has affected Muichiro in a really beneficial way through this episode. Now, in the manga, Muichiro only smiled in like 3 panels. In this episode, he's smiling throughout like the majority of it, which had my stomach in absolute butterflies the whole time. It makes me so happy to see this boy smile. Next, we see in the anime that Tanjiro and Muichiro's crows are kind of being sassy toward one another. Obviously, we know that Muichiro's crow is pretty sassy. We get her kind of bash-talking everyone. And then we see Tanjiro's crow kind of like bashing her back, and they just fight throughout the whole episode, which is really funny. Adds some comedy. And this actually wasn't in the manga. The crows aren't even seen in the 9 panels during Muichiro's little mini arc in this training. So that was a good comedic moment throughout the episode. The anime jumps to something next that is not in the manga, which is that Kanamori has come with Muichiro to his mansion, and this was not in the manga, but basically this man is the swordsmith who helps hone in on Muichiro's swords. He makes them sharp, and so we see that Muichiro had like a full wall of all of his swords. He wants to keep them sharp for the battles ahead. Now, this part was super sweet to add in, and it's basically Muichiro telling Tanjiro that it was his wish to have a place like this, and the master, being Kagaya, granted that wish and built it for him. And I just thought that was so sweet that even through Kagaya's sickness, he's still treating his children, his Hashira, his slayers, the same way that he always does. Muichiro actually comments on this and says that Kagaya always thinks about his children first. He reminds the audience, he reminds Tanjiro, the first thing on Kagaya's mind is always going to be his children and not himself. And Muichiro actually reflects on that, and he says that we should be grateful for that And Tanjiro kind of gives this little smile. He doesn't really say anything, but looking at Tanjiro smile that way makes me think that in his mind, he's thinking, wow, like this is how far Muichiro has come. Like in the past, Muichiro probably wouldn't have even thought anything about it. He would have asked for this place, he would have probably gotten it from Kagaya and moved on without a thank you. But after everything that happened in the Swordsmith Village arc, we see that Muichiro is actually very thankful and grateful for what other people are doing for him. And so again, like we saw in the Tengen episode, we're seeing more growth for these Hashira. So more growth for Muichiro. We're not just skipping kind of through the story like we did kind of in the manga. We are fleshing out these characters even more because they're characters that we love and care about. And they're going to be fighting in the battle to come, so we want to bond with them more. So the next part was also an anime original scene where Muichiro explains to a trainee that they can't fight emotionally or else they're never going to match their opponent's strength and attacks, which I kind of thought was a little odd just because that's what Muichiro had done when he killed the demon that killed his twin brother, Yurichiro. And so maybe he's trying to learn from that. Yes, he won that battle, but it wasn't really in the best way that he could have in that moment, and so maybe he's reflecting on that. The thing after that, he says something about how it's kind of parallel to a moth just flying into a flame. And I think that's very meaningful for Muichiro because that's kind of what he would do in every battle. That's what he did in the fight for fighting that demon that killed his twin brother. We see that Muichiro was very much just like unconcerned. There wasn't a thought in his head. He was just going for it and hoping for the best. And so I think he's actually very much been reflecting on his own self throughout this time from the Swordsmith Village arc, and now he's explaining it to the trainees, which is incredible growth on his part. And something amazing, again, that they did not show in the manga. So all of this is super important anime-only content. We are followed by another anime-only scene where the trainees are asking Tanjiro if Tanjiro could ask the Hashira to kind of lighten up on their talk and their training with them. And this part was also a little odd for me because Tanjiro replies by saying, well, if you think about it, it's actually probably harder on the Hashira because they train during the day with us, and then they still train at night. Which does make sense, of course, but I kind of related that question that the trainees had more so to demons aren't going to show you mercy out on the battlefield. And so yes, the Hashira are being super tough on you. Demons are going to be the exact same way, if not more. They're not going to care about lives out there on the battlefield. Moving forward yet again, we have some more anime-only content combined with something we saw in the manga but much later. So we revisit the eyeballs that we saw from the last episode, and now we see thousands of them. We know that people are being spied on in villages. We know that the Hashira are being spied on all of the trainees, everything up until now, and they led back to the Biwa demon in the Infinity Castle, who we saw from season 1 and from the last season. And so I don't think they've said her name yet, so I'm gonna take a pause on that, but I'm gonna call her the Biwa demon. All of her stuff was in the manga, but a bit later. So again, it's very important that they're adding this in here now to give more context for the future of the story. Now, if you're not a manga reader, you now realize that the Biwa demon is who replaced Hentengu because we now confirmed that she is upper 4. And so that may lead to other questions like, did someone replace 5? Did someone replace 6? And so that will probably be to come. Next up, we see the fight between Obanai and Sanami, and we see that Muichiro is wanting to join in. They kind of view this kind of nighttime battle of training each other as the real Hashira training, which I think makes a lot of sense. The Hashira, you know, they can't just train the Slayers all day. They have to take into account themselves, getting stronger themselves, because the trainees are at a very low level compared to the Hashira. What I loved about this scene was that we are finally seeing more content of the Hashira interacting with each other. It's not just Sanami and Obanai, we're now adding Muichiro to the mix. I've always wondered how they really treat him because he's a kid. He's literally 14 years old. Everything that they've known up until now is kind of an airhead because he lost his memory and things like that. And so now he's attempting more and he's trying more. And yes, he's still powerful the same amount, even more powerful in my opinion because of his whole mental growth. But it's really cool seeing the Hashira interact with him, and they don't just treat him as like a child. Sanemi and Obanai seem to be very impressed by his fighting skills, their eyes going wide. We saw how fast Muichiro was, and even Muichiro came away with all of the bruises. And Sanemi and Obanai had their draw, so we know that they're pretty equal in power, although I feel like Sanemi might be just a little more. Sanemi and Obanai's theme songs combined was absolutely epic. I love Obanai's songs because they have that like electric guitar, which is just so different than any other Demon Slayer character we have for songs. If anything, I feel like Akaza's theme song is pretty unique like that. We follow this scene with another really important anime-only content scene of Muichiro. He is very irritated at this time because there's kind of a loss of urgency in the trainees' training. Muichiro kind of thinks they're just giving up, they're being lazy, whatever. And so he brings out real swords. Now, this wasn't in the manga, of course, but this part I think, again, is really important to show for Muichiro's growth. Yes, he's being too intense here, I believe, but he also explains to the trainees after that one that he was facing had a breakdown that the reason why he's doing that is because he wants to see them survive. He doesn't want them to just die to demons and have a short life. He says that he wants them to live a long life. And he even explains to them, this is how I feel, and this is why we're doing this, because he cares about them. Now, the Muichiro before, yes, he was also very intense, but he was also quiet and kind of rude and not really observant to other people's emotions. Whereas now, after all of his growth we've had, we see that he's explaining to these trainees his own feelings and emotions. We finally go back to getting some manga moments. This next part was actually only one panel in the manga, which is the fight between Muichiro and Tanjiro. We get a bit more of that in the anime, which was really cool. Both of their fighting skills combined. And then we get a couple more panels of the content that we see in this next scene of the trainees asking if they can move on, just like Tanjiro. And Muichiro turns around and he's like, no, what makes you think that? You're all terrible. Which is just so Muichiro, and that was in the manga, but it was just so much more funny in the anime because of the way that Muichiro turned around and just his face fell complete straight face, and he was just like, no. After this scene in the manga, that is when Tanjiro moves on to Mitsuri's training after being with Muichiro for 5 days, which that 5 days was the same in the anime. However, in the anime, we actually get an added 5 minutes of Muichiro and Tanjiro having a paper airplane contest. Now, when I first watched this, my first thought was, oh my gosh, this is so cute. This was not in the manga. A minute or two in, I was thinking, yeah, people are gonna hate this because it's not really moving the story forward. But the reason, again, why I'm talking about this is that it is important, that scene that was added in. Yes, maybe some people think that's a waste of 5 minutes. What maybe you need to think about is that Muichiro is a 14-year-old kid. Tanjiro is just a couple years older. They're literal children just having fun. We have not seen children in this show really have fun in a while. Taking this paper airplane scene and maybe just pausing on criticism and just thinking about, wow, these are literally just kids. They're just trying to have fun in this world of complete disaster and chaos because of Muzan. They deserve fun too. And so I personally really enjoyed this scene. I thought it was a lot of fun. It had me tearing up because we don't really get to see that often at all. We see a lot of death, we see a lot of battles. Just enjoy these happy moments while they last because, as you know, this is not an infinite story. It's going to end pretty soon, and obviously battles are tragic. So keep that in mind if you're criticizing scenes like this. One thing about this scene though that got me thinking is like, what if Obanai or Sanemi happened to walk by and they saw Muichiro doing this with the kids? I think they'd be so mad. Like, how would they react? I don't know, it's just funny thinking about because they'd be so mad. But at the same time, like, They can't interfere. That's like disrespecting Muichiro's training, so calm down. We end off on a very sweet scene of Muichiro and Tanjiro talking to each other in Muichiro's mansion, and this was really sweet. Again, we're kind of closing up this time of Muichiro and Tanjiro. He's moving on, but he's still talking to Muichiro, kind of like as a mentor thing. I think Muichiro also sees Tanjiro as kind of a big brother, but they're talking about Nezuko, what's happening with her, Muzan. Muichiro makes a very sweet and direct comment that they're going to fight Muzan together, which is just really empowering and makes me emotional. But something else that we get now that was not in the manga at this specific part, but we saw later, is that we now see where Nezuko is, and we see that she is with someone that Tanjiro trusts a lot. And we see that back from season 1, Yurikadaki. And so that was a really cool thing that the anime added in a bit sooner, which I think again was a good move, because all this time we don't know where Nezuko is since the first episode. We thought that maybe she was still at the mansion. We didn't really know where she went. She hasn't been in it at all. And so it's good to, you know, bring it back to her, because I do see her as being one of the main characters. She's the reason Muzan's coming, so she's incredibly important to the story. We get the credits, which end the episode, and then we actually go into a really short scene of Tanjiro making it to Mitsuri's training. And this whole chunk at the very end actually covered like the majority of Mitsuri's training. It was like 7 panels, and it's the same thing. Tanjiro arrives, they're both really excited, and Tanjiro sees that she has honey. They're talking about sweets, and it's just a very fun scene. We know that Mitsuri is going to be next, but they probably aren't going to expand on her a whole bunch just because they already got through like more than half of her panels. And then we go into the Taisho secret and we end the episode. Thank you so much for listening to my thoughts on the similarities and differences from the manga to the anime. Let me know your own thoughts if you have any in the comments. I'm going to be moving now into a spoilery section of the video where I kind of give my own little Taisho secret at the end. This is specifically for manga readers. I am going to be spoiling something that happens in a later manga. It is pretty intense. I don't want to spoil anyone, so we are going to move into that now. I will see you next time if you have not read the manga. Bye! We're back for another Taisho secret of depression and sadness. Muichiro dies in one of the last mangas, as you know. I will be a complete wreck when that happens. He is my 4th favorite character of the whole Demon Slayer series, and this episode had me crying because this is the last thing we are seeing of Muichiro genuinely happy. He's a 14-year-old child. Why is he dying? It's so sad. Like, watching this scene of the paper airplanes absolutely killed me. I was just sitting there crying the whole time. Not to mention I was watching this with a group of my friends where 3 of them have not read the manga yet. And I was like trying to be quiet because why am I sitting there sobbing is probably what they're thinking, because it's such a cute moment. It's not supposed to be sad. But those moments at the end of like Muichiro with his hair blowing, he's looking out at the paper airplanes, he's smiling, Tanjiro is right there next to him. There's gonna be flashbacks to that when Kokushibo stinking kills him in the next arc of Demon Slayer. I can't get over this. It's so sad. Why are we killing children? Not to mention how he dies is completely disturbing and tragic. I need to stop talking. I'm getting upset. I love this episode, by the way. I loved it. Muichiro is my favorite. We know that the creators of this, Muichiro must be a favorite because he just got a whole episode to himself. We're not going to continue seeing that for the rest of the Hashira. There's too many more, plus things happen with Pagaya and Muzan at the end of this arc. And so, I am very thankful that Muichiro got his time. This is about it for him. The next we see of him is going to be tragedy, so prepare yourselves, manga readers. prepare yourselves. With that, this is going to end this video. Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you have other thoughts, different opinions, whatever, leave it below. And I will see you next time for next week's episode. Bye!